fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free.
I have come here to chew bubble gum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubble.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, thanks for being here today. I greatly appreciate it. This show is essentially a continuance of my previous discussions from August 15th and September 17th, respectively, with Dan Wilson, independent candidate for Kootenai County Sheriff in North Idaho, running against the incumbent sheriff, Bob Norris. And I want to emphasize, as per normal, that this show consists of my opinions and my opinions of, and those I should say of my guest tonight, or today, Dan Wilson. As last time I explained, there has to be an understanding of the role of sheriffs versus chiefs of police, two very different types of law enforcement, heads of office, and then intertwined between them, the role of constitutional sheriffs. And as I mentioned on the two prior shows, yes, we're discussing the election of a local sheriff's candidate in my state of Idaho. But it's not just applicable here. The issues talked about today are equally applicable to any persons running for sheriff in any state, in any jurisdiction, including yours. So if you have a sheriff that's going to come up for re-election, you might definitely want to be listening here, because you're going to want a sheriff who is an independent-minded individual and who puts considerations of the county citizens first, not bureaucrats and not politicians. Their considerations shouldn't be first. And I remind everybody that's watching today and who will be watching later in podcast that, and this is critical, sheriffs are elected and chiefs of police are appointed. Two very, I should say, dissimilar kinds of things. Sheriffs answer to the electorate, the people that elect them. Chiefs of police answer to whomever the appointing authority is, whether it's whatever model it happens to be, whether it's like a strong mayor, a city council, a city manager, some kind of an authority that has the lawful ability to make those appointments, not via an election. So this is why, to me, sheriffs are the fundamental basis of so much that we do in law enforcement. Sheriffs answer to the people. Chiefs of police answer to whoever is that individual jurisdiction's biggest, most powerful political figure, because that's the individual that does the appointment. Now, on prior interviews with Dan Wilson, we discussed the current political push in a number of leftist cities and states to just eliminate the position of sheriff wholesale. And those are things that are motivated solely by power, control, and money. By, again, in my opinion, by leftists. True, actual lovers of America believe in the power of the people, not government, which has taken on what I think is the insane and insatiable hunger of the largest behemoth extant, because government is quite that. That's why, to my way of thinking, a constitutional sheriff is critical to the survival of our republic. It's not a democracy. Folks, check the difference between the two, if you would, please. And as always, Truth in Podcasting. I contributed to the campaign of Dan Wilson I attended a fundraiser for him on September 7th. And I say this also because I do not promote individuals or items or anything, essentially, books that I've had on the show and authors that I personally don't endorse myself. There's no point to that as far as I'm concerned. So what I'd like to do right now is bring on Dan Wilson, not a Republican. He's not a Democrat. He is an independent who is candidate for the sheriff of Kootenai County in North Idaho. And this is likely the final time that we'll be speaking before the election, which is just in 13 days now, which I find is rather staggering. Less than 2 weeks before the election. We've spoken twice before. This will be the third time. So welcome, Dan Wilson, to an event where I'd like to provide you with the ability to say anything that you'd like to say in its finality. And mostly tonight, today, I'm so used to broadcasting at night. There are some final issues, I guess we could call them. I want to be able to highlight recent events that came to a spotlight, and also to spotlight the importance of persons like yourself, and give you a chance to make any kind of a final statement that you'd like to make about your candidacy. So, Dan Wilson, you say that you're where's my manners, BZ? First, welcome, Dan Wilson. Great to see you here today.
Brother, thank you once again for having me on this show. And I'm thoroughly looking forward to the discussion and the cigars and whiskey afterwards.
And I have heard rumors to the possibility of that effect later on this week. Mere rumors, speculative at best. We'll handle that, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, Monty Python, in just a bit. So, Dan Wilson, you say that you're a constitutional sheriff. What does that mean, do you think, to the average resident of Kootenai County? Why is that important?
I think most people think that if you call yourself a constitutional sheriff, therefore you are. And we know that you can use a lot of buzzwords that sound constitutional, but few, unfortunately, understand really what a constitutional sheriff is. And I would argue that a constitutional sheriff is a man who has a complete understanding of the history of our country, going all the way back to the Mayflower Compact, when the Pilgrims came over, the early colonies, the Americans, right after the French Indian War, when they decided that they wanted to be independent, they wanted to be their own country. And then the year-long struggle after the Declaration of Independence, the years-long struggle, rather. And finally, at the conclusion of that, when it became apparent that their confederation, the Articles of Confederation that bound all the states kind of together, weren't working, why they decided that they needed to start over, and eventually they formed this constitutional republic that we have. Well, a constitutional sheriff understands what the founders were saying in their own words as to why they were arguing for the types of government we have. And very importantly, they understand about the Bill of Rights and why certain founders refused to sign and ratify in their collective states the Constitution without amending the Bill of Rights. And of course, we have the first 10 that we refer to as our Bill of Rights, those first 10 amendments. So a constitutional sheriff clearly understands not only our history and our struggle for liberty without compromise, but also understands the intent of the founders, the framers of those documents, in order to be that interposition between the people of his county, those that he has sworn to protect and defend against an unaccountable, out of control government, federal and or state. That's truly what a constitutional sheriff is.
And I find it interesting that I don't believe I've heard the current sheriff, Bob Norris, termed a constitutional sheriff. Any speculations, do you think, of why that is, and why he is apparently, or has apparently, avoided that phrase, so to speak?
Well, he's definitely a deep stater. He came here, and people assume, because if you say MAGA or I'm pro-Republican or whatever, you can dupe a lot of people, especially when you're doing nefarious things behind the scenes. As long as you say, well, I'm not going to take your guns away, I'm not going to make you wear a mask, and I won't enforce any red flag laws, people go, wow, that's a great sheriff, and therefore this is who I'm going to stand behind. But the reality of it is that Bob Norris refused to meet with Sheriff Richard Mack, who is really the founder of the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, the gold standard when it comes to identifying constitutional-minded men and women that are running for the office. And in fact, he failed to even show up at any of Sheriff Mack's local meetings right here that he held in Kootenai County for training for law enforcement. It was open to the public, to elected officials, as well as all law enforcement. But I think that by doing so, you're playing both sides, because you can tell people you're constitutional if you get the backing of the Republican Party and they say that you're constitutional, well, then there's no dispute. But at the same time, to have the label constitutional sheriff by somebody like Richard Mack of the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association is marking you, because the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association is constantly under attack by groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center and others who believe that, the constitutional sheriffs are nothing more than men who decide what laws they will and will not defend. And that is patently false.
So I don't know, by listening to that, would it be possible to suggest that he didn't want to be stained by something as terrible as the U.S. Constitution? So kind of a, if you will, sort of a holding at arm's length kind of thing, right? Because there are repercussions if you place yourself in that kind of a similar category.
Yes, 100%. And to come out and put yourself on the line to say, I do believe in the responsibility and the sovereignty of the sheriff. It doesn't work well when you have a lot of your Homeland Security buddies that you are intimately involved with. They don't like that. The feds don't like the term constitutional sheriff. In fact, they continually malign that name or that title to be, anti-American, terrorist, whatever you want to, throw it for whatever describer. And the reality of it is you cannot be part of the big boy club with the federal government if you, in fact, say, no, I'm drawing a line in the sand. I know where the demarcation is. I know where your jobs begin and end, and I know where my authority ends and begins.
I think I asked you this last time, but I think it's appropriate to do this again. And I'm going somewhere with this to be shown and displayed in just a moment. What do you think is the biggest difference between yourself as a candidate, independent, I should say, candidate for sheriff of Kootenai County, and the current sheriff, Bob Norris?
Yeah. Well, the biggest difference is I truly understand what limited government is and what it is to be a servant of the people. I did it for 12 years. 12 years of my time as a police officer, no charge to my community, while at the same time holding down all of my businesses. I went through all the same training, had all the same liability exposure, went to all the same kind of calls, but I've been outside of law enforcement to be able to not be tainted by just a us versus them, only think inside the bubble of law enforcement. And so I have the experience of not only being a servant for 12 years at no cost to my community, but also I understand the basics of patrol and how important it is to have good leaders in patrol and what patrol needs, but also my extensive business administrative expertise of managing contracts with the United States government, Department of Defense, state governments, big medical, budgeting, creating jobs out of thin air. I understand not only the practical side of law enforcement, but also the business administrative side of it. And Bob Norris has only been a cop for 30 years.
Well, as a figurehead, basically that's what a sheriff is, a representative of the entire department. It would seem to me that you would want to be well-versed in all of those things. You'd want to be well-versed in law enforcement, and you'd also want to be well-versed in the ability to manage an organization for a profit in a private arena, and also indicating the ability to run an organization, not into the ground, shall we say.
Yeah.
And didn't you do, for example, a comparison between yourself, Norris, and two other candidates? And I refer folks at this point to the internet at theidahosheriff.com, theidahosheriff.com. And of these candidates, there was a comparison made, and there was yourself, current Sheriff Bob Norris, an individual named Kyle Woodward, and another individual named Justin Nagel. Interesting in terms of when it came time for an interview, one of these two at the bottom didn't even appear at all. So during this, and you just delineated the biggest difference between the two. I'm sure Kyle is a wonderful individual, and I'm sure that Justin is probably a wonderful individual, but I don't think that these two folks can be taken seriously at this point. And you indicated what the difference would be. Now, I also want to go here. At one point, and I think I've seen or heard of this on two prior videos that I've watched regarding current Sheriff Bob Norris. So apparently he dismissed out of hand the possibility of any kind of human trafficking whatsoever in Kootenai County. And I did, because I can, a very brief internet search. All I did is find my current and my favorite internet engine, and I came up with two articles immediately, essentially contradicting that statement. And here's one from the AP, which is directly referring to Coeur d'Alene. And Coeur d'Alene, oh my, perhaps this is the time to do this. Now, here's the state of Idaho. And as you can see up in the upper portion of Idaho, that's Kootenai County. And that's the jurisdiction of the current sheriff of Kootenai County. Now, from that little red area, rather square, this is Kootenai County itself. And it takes into consideration some absolutely beautiful areas, Lake Coeur d'Alene, all the property around it, Coeur d'Alene itself, Hayden Lake, beautiful, beautiful areas with people who are generally lean to the right a little bit and respect one another. It is a pleasure and a privilege to be here in Kootenai County. Now, that having been said, let's go back to this. I went to the internet. I found this. The traps of human trafficking exist in Kootenai County, and a pair of nonprofits are reaching out to all areas of the state to expose the manipulative crimes. This is from AP, sourced from Coeur d'Alene, directly smack dab kind of in the middle of Kootenai County. Then there was another article that I discovered immediately. I mean, if I can do it, then anyone else can do it as well. This is from KTVB.com. In the dark corners of communities around Idaho and in plain sight, people are forced into modern slavery. Well, if I can find these, allegedly other persons should be able to do that as well. So then I also noticed that let's talk truth here just for a second. We know that trafficking exists. Kootenai County sits basically on a major east-west corridor, the I-90 corridor, which goes all the way west to the state of Washington and then continues on for some distance through Montana, et cetera, going east. And also there's the north-south corridor, I-95, again, running right split through the middle of Kootenai County. So I find it intriguing that in terms of law enforcement, that's similar to saying, because been there, done that, got the medal, so to speak. That's like saying in law enforcement, we knew gangs existed in the 1980s, But administrations, I watched this in California, didn't take them seriously as we watched their influx. Now, I've seen that show. I was a personal witness and directly involved in all of that as an individual in patrol and an individual in detectives. Those became the times of the greatest gun violence in this nation, certainly in the state of California, and crime in the U.S. in the 80s and 90s. So, though you may not want that for the citizens and the people of Kootenai County, to dismiss it out of hand and say that we don't have that here is an indicator that perhaps you need to be taking that a little bit more seriously. And I'd like to make a direct reference to this then. Dan Wilson, independent candidate for sheriff of Kootenai County. Didn't you have a gentleman on your own podcast, a man by the name of Nate Allen, from an organization called The Innocent, about essentially that very same topic? And if so, what did that gentleman have to say or regale to you?
Yeah, so that's Nate Lewis of The Innocent, and here's what our conversation.
I'm sorry, Nate, I apologize.
Yeah, Nate Lewis. Nate, great dude, happens to reside right here in Kootenai County, from Kootenai County, but his operation works countrywide. So he's not just focused right here in Kootenai County. But here's what I can tell you in our conversation, which is available on our YouTube page, The Idaho Sheriff. We talk about what is going on. And when people talk about human trafficking, there's kind of a lot of different ideas of what that is. But basically, anytime that you're taking a human and forcing them to do something against their will, whether that's slave labor, whether that's children that can't consent, or whether it's women that you get hooked on drugs, or children that you're trafficking, it comes in all kinds of varieties. So it's extremely irresponsible for a existing sheriff to say we find no evidence of it taking place here in Kootenai County. Now, Nate, his organization, The Innocent, provides resources to local law enforcement all across the country to help them find and seek out these predators, these traffickers that are participating in specifically the selling of children. And what that looks like is for example, they can set up their program right here in Kootenai County. And he tells me that recently they put up a decoy ad for a 12-year-old girl. And within 48 hours, they had over 60 hits of individual men that were willing to travel to Kootenai County to buy a 12-year-old from a parent. So people have to understand that we're not finding the human trafficking because we're not actively going out and searching for it. If we're waiting for, at a patrol level for us to get a call, and then in the course of our investigation, we determine that there's a human trafficking ring, that's not how it works most of the time. But Nate went on to tell me, then he said flat, and he gave me permission to say this, he presented that information to Bob Norris, and Bob Norris, in front of a state legislator who was in attendance at this meeting, flat out refused to take the information that they had and said he wasn't going to even begin to look at it until after he was reelected. And he did not want Dan Wilson to get wind that there's actually a problem in Kootenai County. Now, after that time, and BZ, maybe I'm going too far ahead on this, so stop me if you want me to.
Oh, please keep going, because one thing that I'd like to remind everybody is, well, this problem doesn't exist, but apparently already this gentleman, Nate Lewis, has exposed the fact that your potential sons and daughters could already and could potentially be wrapped up in a ring, something like this. The predators, therefore, this illustrates, are already out there. They're out there, and they were asked to come here.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That
so
could be more plain to me. Continue, please, sir.
So I've also spoken to two other organizations that deal with human trafficking. One is a team that goes all over the country to rescue young girls that have been trafficked. And we know of 9 such cases in the past year that have taken place right here in Kootenai County. And then lastly, we work with Safe Harbor, which is, a support program for women that have been and children that have been trafficked. Tell the stories of what they're dealing with. So it absolutely is happening right here. The most troubling part is that about 2 weeks ago, Nate Lewis held an event at a local forum here in Kootenai County. And it was understood that this was not a political event. They didn't want sheriffs talking about it. Nate wanted to talk to the people about what's going on and share his organization and what resources they have. But once you know who showed up, Sheriff Robert Bob Norris shows up to this event and eventually, even though he was asked not to, gets the mic, coerces Nate to give him the mic, and he comes up with his notepad and he starts talking about all these different by the book sex trafficking events that took place, human trafficking and sex trafficking. And he says, well, basically out of, the past 3 or 4 years, here's all my stats. We have something like 20 cases, and really only but 2 of them were real considered trafficking events. And he tried downplaying it by saying, well, we're on top of this. So, I mean, don't worry about it. There's nothing happening here. And here's our stats to prove it. But the average person, and you would get this because you're in law enforcement, knows that all he's talking about is stats from the patrol level. These are investigations that happen when, a cop gets dispatched to a call, and in the course of that investigation, he determines that other crimes are taking place. He's failing to address the fact that there are people that are willing to come here to abuse our children, and in many cases also steal our children for their purposes outside of the state.
Well, the problem with that, having worked with computer crime before, and also I was well versed in having worked the Child Abuse Bureau from my original department, a number of appointments and places in the sheriff's department that I came from. A great deal of this occurs over the internet, privately, with many individuals. So I fail to understand the need to I get that someone would want to assure people that this isn't a huge issue. I get that concept, but number one, that didn't seem to be the proper interview or venue, I should say. And number two, to dismiss this entirely out of hand is, in my opinion, that's not the proper way to go on this. These things occur. Idaho is certainly within the link of anybody on the internet, certainly Kootenai County, and to not want to refuse to acknowledge on a larger overarching scale that this exists is not the proper thing to be doing. I watched that show, as I indicated, and many of the people out in the field and in detectives were saying, this is a huge problem. And it started in Southern California, and it's coming up here. And we need to be aware of it. We need to be awake, because this is our next huge problem, including bags of violence.
Yes.
And it was. Yeah. And to dismiss completely out of hand some kind of a huge problem, which the entire nation, the world, is encountering right now, that seems like wishful thinking. That's not reality, and that's not what you would want somebody who's in law enforcement. That's not the tack that I believe that you'd want them to be taking. And I can appreciate it. And again, another reason why I'm having you on the show is for you to be able to indicate what it is that you've done, what it is that you'd like to do in the future. And human trafficking, though huge, is just one aspect of all of these things.
Right.
There was another issue that came up, and I want to, let's address an issue head on. Recently, there was an allegation made against you in social media, if I'm not mistaken, about something that allegedly occurred in the past. Now, I have a copy of it, and I won't read the whole thing, but folks, if you're watching right now, you can read it. And these are allegations made by an individual from Coeur d'Alene, as you can see in the letter. And maybe you can tell me about this.
BZ, I don't know if that's the right letter or not. This one's
Okay.
called Make Him One and Done.
Ah, okay. Perhaps I don't have it. There we go.
There you go.
That's the one that I was thinking of. Thank you. And correct me if I'm wrong, this was an allegation that was made in Facebook on social media. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, that is correct. Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm not going to read it, but you responded. And folks, as you're going through down there, you can see that these are some rather heinous charges to make to an individual. And if I'm not mistaken, this was your response from a law firm. A cease and desist letter was sent. That's the first page of that, directly referring to the social media post in Facebook. And the second part of that letter. So can you have it? Let me preface this by saying that having worked in child abuse and getting numerous cases of child abuse, you have to consider the situation and the timing of whatever allegations are made, from divorce to motivations of dislike, all sorts of ways and means of attempting to use law enforcement or the penal code as a cudgel against an individual. And again, seen that, went to the show, experienced it directly many times. So in response to that, what would you like to say in order to address those allegations, Dan Wilson?
Yeah, 100% they're false. Now, I have already cut a podcast with my wife back when that allegation came out to set the record straight, and it can be found on theidahosheriff.com under our podcast, The Idaho Sheriff. And I believe it's episode 1, putting something rather lies, putting the truth to social media lies. But here's where it really breaks down. This individual was a former stepdaughter of mine. I have not had any contact with this individual since, I want to say about 2008, 2009, somewhere in there. So quite a few years. Her mother and I were married. I was 23. Her mother was 29. And she was about 7, 8 years old when she came to live in our house. And over the years, obviously, those relationships get strained when you blend families. But specifically, what happened in this case, it was false, is I lived on historic family land, and I lived in an area that was rural. And we had a piece of property that other properties had to access. And it used to be all in the family, but as the family members passed away, the places were sold. And so the neighbor directly to the north that bought my grandparents' old homestead, they bought it but didn't get all their paperwork done and ended up needing a piece of my land that they wanted for their easement to get their title to close. And they came in and wanted to take the land without any compensation, and I politely denied that. But what started then was, in essence, a neighbor war for many years. And this couple that bought this place, it was, a man and a wife, no children. They developed a relationship with my stepdaughter and started grooming her. And so in an attempt to get back to me, and we have the emails to prove this, in essence, she started putting ideas into my stepdaughter's head, coaxed her on what to say. And eventually, while she was talking about the types, this being the neighbor lady, what types of things should happen to me from an assaultive nature and how I should be killed and poisoned, and telling the stepdaughter how to bypass our rules and be deceitful, she then turned me into CPS. And so the stepdaughter, before CPS came to visit, said, "Hey, I have a confession to make. This is going on," and provided us all of the emails, which I still have to this day, the electronic format. CPS did come. They took our statements, and there was about a 4 or 5 month investigation process This was about 2006 into early 2007. And as a result of that investigation, they found that the allegations were unfounded. And so that whole event was extremely unsettling and upsetting, as you can well imagine. I did produce those emails to the CPS investigators, but they didn't care because they said that, we can't not investigate any kind of an allegation. However, the stepdaughter then was emancipated and wanted on her own to go and live with her paternal grandmother in North Idaho. We paid the attorney, who's now a judge in Kootenai County, to handle that. And that was the last that I personally saw of this kid. But realized that several years later, when I became a Spokane police officer in the hiring process, I went through an extensive background check. I went through polygraphs. I went through psych evals. Extensive background checks. And then I did the same thing several years later when I went to the Liberty Lake Police Department. Eventually in 2017, my ex-wife and I began a divorce. The state of Washington and the guardian ad litem in that case recommended, and the courts sustained, that I have majority custody of our minor children, which I still have to this day. So my answer to all of this is that it's 100% false. It is a smear campaign. This child, she's not a child now, she's a woman in her 30s, obviously has an alliance to her mother, my ex-wife, and my ex-wife and her both have an axe to grind with me. So that is why they decided to use this information, include with several other anti-Dan Wilson campaign folks. And it's really unfortunate when you enter into politics, you have to endure some of this. But yes, that cease and desist letter is absolutely what was sent. And after the campaign, as we have been advised by our attorneys, we will be acting on our promise to litigate this. So there's going to be probably a lot of people that are going to be pulled into this because they were also told anybody that was caught disseminating and further pushing this false allegation will be held accountable too.
Well, let me confirm for people that may be concerned. Were you criminally investigated?
Well, through CPS. So,
No, I mean,
it was an official investigation, but not by law enforcement. No.
Department. No. Okay.
No.
Were you arrested?
I was not and have never been arrested.
Okay. Did you go to any kind of court for a criminal proceeding from this?
I did not.
And you were not adjudged guilty in any fashion from any criminal result of this incident?
That is correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we have everything upright and that you have an ability to speak on your own behalf.
Yeah.
Now, you had spoken. Oh, let me go to one other thing while I'm here. I noticed this from your X page.
Mm-hmm.
This is something where apparently Sheriff Norris wrote some information on, I believe, the official Kootenai County Sheriff's Department Facebook page about that with regard to yourself and or anybody that was running against him. Any thoughts about that with regard to the usage of an official page for things of this nature, for example?
Yeah, one of my number one contentions with Sheriff Bob Norris is his abuse of the color of his authority. We've seen this all year long, not only relating to me and my campaign, but to anybody else that dares to question him or that is not a full-fledged supporter. And so we're now finding, in addition to this piece right here, which you just showed, where the sheriff on his official Sheriff Norris page, which I believe is a violation of, Secretary of State campaign finance sunshine laws, rather, what he's doing is he's in his official capacity saying, look, I'm going to go after a mother, a grandmother, an independent single person who has done some research on me and published what they have found that I don't like. and we're going to go after her. We've turned her in for violations. And in addition to that, anybody that is saying anything against him by the opposition, don't believe it. They're all liars. And so when you have a sheriff that continually bullies the publicly like this, and in private, but publicly, that should be a warning sign that this individual is unstable and that is tyrannical. Again, we talked about what's the difference between a constitutional sheriff and a sheriff that just claims he's constitutional. Well, I want to pull people back to July of this year. A lady came forward and filed a tort claim against Kootenai County and Sheriff Bob Norris over words that he said to her at a town hall in Cataldo back in April at a candidate forum. And her statements allege, in essence, that there was a bunch of sexual charged accusations against her. They were embarrassing. They were defamatory. Several witnesses have heard this. And what happened is that as a result of this woman filed the tort claim with the county. 90 days passed, and she has now, my understanding is her lawsuit has hit the clerk's office today. But about a week after she filed that tort claim, the sheriff, in his official capacity, using the Kootenai County Sheriff's letterhead and seal, put a bounty out against this woman that filed the complaint. And in this bounty, he states that he will offer $10,000 of his own funds to anybody that can find video to refute what this claimant was saying against him. Now let that sink in. She has already filed a complaint, a tort, claiming she's already been violated by the sheriff. And his brilliant response is to, a week later, double down and try to intimidate her using the force, the power of the sheriff's office. And this is extremely troubling. This pattern happens over and over again. There was a post that was dropped today, again on the sheriff's Facebook page, where they're alleging that somebody that is a supporter of mine was handing out baggies, and that itself is also wrong, and that people need to be wary of what the campaign is doing, and alluding to that it's illegal. I have never seen, and I came from Washington State where I thought things were dirty over there. I have never seen an unaccountable sheriff operate like this, where the prosecuting attorney is not even stepping in and reeling this guy back. I mean, you would think that the county attorneys would be pulling him aside and saying, you are putting the county at extreme risk. We're already being, we're looking at a lawsuit, and you need to just shut your mouth. And he cannot help it. It's part of his instability.
Those are the allegations made. That was a chance to respond, because I want to make sure that I allow you to make your portion to let people know what has happened as a result of those things. Now, you'd spoken originally on both prior occasions about creating a sheriff's posse of sorts to directly prepare Kootenai County for any kind of upcoming disaster or critical incident. And it's odd that since the last time we spoke, there were hurricanes in the east, in Florida, in North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, and possibly some other states that were involved. And we can see the importance of such a thing. So after watching those events of Hurricane Helene and Milton, and what I consider to be just an execrable response of FEMA and the federal government, and most state governments, with the exception of Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis, I think people need to realize that FEMA is not a first responder. And as I wrote, I think on X somewhere, perhaps even to you, I said, FEMA's not a first responder. They're not a really good second responder. And occasionally they're an absolutely very poor third and fourth responder. And sometimes they can't even spell NIMS SIMS, and the federal government will know exactly what I'm referring to in that. This is not the venue for an explanation. And that's why your platform of essentially deep crisis preparation first makes so much sense on a county level. There's a need to organize now, create your lists of able-bodied experts now, align and identify sources of supplies and equipment now, ahead of whatever is forming with Kootenai County in its path. I'd like to also make this reminder to everybody. Obviously, I wasn't here at the time, but Mount St. Helens corked off in the early 80s. And from what I've been able to discern, roughly a foot of ash fell in the town of Coeur d'Alene at the time.
A lot of ash. I remember that event.
And if that isn't a critical incident and a crisis that one needs to be organized, I think my point was the fact that some people may try to hint that it can't happen here. Well, it can happen here, and it has happened here, and it will happen now in the future. So I think my question to you was why only now is a sheriff's candidate proposing programs that should have been in place during Bob Norris's his 4 years, and quite frankly, should have been in place by the sheriff before him and before that one and before and so on. And so if you would, Dan Wilson, independent candidate for Sheriff of Kootenai County, address that. This is something that I would think that especially in fairly rural areas, because Kootenai County does have some significant rural areas. It's not just the town of Coeur d'Alene. Why wouldn't somebody want to address this? And or since you brought it up as a campaign issue, why are other individuals now just starting to bring this up? Yeah. This is a number one, an excellent idea whose time is past making sure that it has been installed. So why now? In other words, if you weren't here, Sheriff Bob Norris would be doing what? Would he himself be preparing Kootenai County? Anyway, Dan Wilson, weigh in on that if you would, please.
No, the fact of the matter is that he's had no plans until I came, late last year and started piping out what my policies are, which is to be prepared for anything. And we know that the federal government is not coming to save us. The state government isn't coming to save us. It is up to us to save us. And now, going back as to why there isn't a plan, I think it's because too many of our sheriffs have erroneously believed that the Emergency Management Act is going to be their end-all, save-all. They have believed for far too long, like all government, that we can always fall back. The federal government with the big guns will come in and save the day. And you know what? A decade ago, that might have been true. But we've had hints similar to COVID, which was an end run around the Bill of Rights. We've had all of the tales of what's going on. And it didn't take, it doesn't take a very, very educated man to look at what's coming down the road to say, okay, we saw what happened in Hawaii, where the locals were taking care of the aftermath of the fire, and they were doing so well until the federal government came in and shut it down, and then it became chaotic, and people lost a lot of valuable commodities that they were using in their recovery efforts, and it wasn't a priority. The federal government, the FEMA guys, aren't concerned about their community the same way as you are. We have seen over and over again the inability of the federal government to come in and provide the resources that we need in a timely fashion. So look, as a business guy for 25 years, part of what I've had to do is come up with contingency planning. And I know the sheriff is supposed to be part of the Emergency Management Act. That's mandated by not only federal law, but also state. But he thinks that, that small group of people is going to be the end all. And here's the reality. In any kind of an event, and most likely what we're going to experience up here in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm just talking about right now man-made disasters, not even talking about, I'm talking about natural disasters, not man-made disasters. We're susceptible to earthquakes. I don't care what anybody says.
That's
I have
true.
lived in this region my entire life. We have had earthquakes in Spokane, in the greater Spokane area. So that is definitely on the radar. Second of all, fires. You look at the fires that even ravaged this entire valley back in 1910. We are experiencing horrendous fires year after year after year, to where the majority of the time now, from July on to middle of September, it's all smoke. But if you don't have people in your midst that, number one, believe that they're part of the solution and that they have a duty to help respond, you get people that are caught unaware, and that breeds panic. So my belief is by having a citizens posse of vetted individuals that come from all walks of life, engineers, equipment operators, carpenters, electricians, plumbers, folks that know how to put up radio towers and get communications going. Whatever you are, you have a purpose here, that in the event where our infrastructure is badly damaged, we know who to immediately go to come up with our triage solutions. And then we start, after triage, looking at what are long-term solutions. But ultimately, you have to protect life. You have to maintain the rule of law, and you have to protect property. One of the things that they're facing in North Carolina has been looters coming in and stealing people's possessions after those people have fled. And so by having a citizens posse, not only are we prepared for any kind of event, and again, a man-made is definitely a possibility today. We could have grid attacks. We could have EMPs. We can have all sorts of disasters, or these polystability guys, these 20-year-old military-age males from Africa and the Middle East and China that are here amongst us. Look, we have to be ready for anything. We have to be prepared for the worst. And I believe that the sheriff is the most uniquely qualified individual to unite everybody under a common cause of the rule of law and protection of the county. And it's not just our county, by the way. Imagine in this region, if we get hit, we may not be saving ourselves. We may be having to go to our neighbors to assist them, and vice versa. And so my idea with the citizens posse is, not only will it be robust and inclusive of everybody, regardless of what your political ideation is, but we want to have other counties around us adopt the same program, so that we can be an extremely resilient community all over North Idaho.
Which, to my way of thinking, is forearmed is forewarned. We know historically that many of these things have already come through. They already exist. Now, we're sitting not that terribly far from Yellowstone, for example. If that bad boy corks off, I think you can probably say adieu to the rest of the United States. That's not the specific issue. There are local issues that affect us directly, and that we can't have some kind of a wildfire or a natural event, or, as you indicate, a man-made event. We, the citizens, and we have to look out, in my opinion, we have to look out for our families first, our communities first, our counties first. Once we are solidified and unified, we can go out and assist other people. But once we have our own acts together, this needs to be job one. And the sheriff of a county is the first individual, the first line defense, besides you as a person and your family and your neighborhood, to help people get through critical incidents and events. I have two more areas that I'd like to address. And one of them, I do politics. And I had a 3-hour show about 2 weeks ago where various individuals in the federal government in DC said, well, it was a wonderful response by FEMA, and they did their wonderful jobs. And to that, I let 3 hours of videos play from the victims of these scenes, whose family members probably and still are under, I don't know, feet of mud, and may in fact never be found, never discovered.
Yeah.
And I let them speak for themselves in their own words on videos, audio and video, for 3 straight hours to refute the fact that there's going to be some kind of a federal government FEMA Deus ex machina to come and save you. No, that's not going to happen, which is why I believe in your philosophy of prepare first. That should be a priority in any sheriff's department. But part of that was an attitude of a sheriff. And I played this on the show. And then I also noticed that you picked it up as well. And this is Sarah Carter. Now, this is one of the few actual journalists left in the United States. I played this on my show. This is a local sheriff whose name I do not know. He's from a devastated area, but in my opinion, it bears repeating right now.
I was going to say something about Biden and Harris.
Yes, what were you going to say? Oh.
But I don't like to curse. I'm scared there'll be little ears listening.
Well, and you've been up here. You've been up here for how long?
Just 2 days.
2 days?
Sheriff hadn't left, and he's doing a fantastic job. So
That's right. I mean, Sheriff, you've been amazing. Thank you so much for all you do. I'm going to definitely get this up on social media. And we're going live tonight with Sean Hannity. But if you had a message for the White House and how they've handled the situation up here.
Here we go.
In North Carolina, what would your message be, Sheriff Wright?
if you're going to do the things you've been talking about doing, we just assume you stay out of the way and let the good men and women around the mountain area and the foothills take care of our own, because you're nothing more than a boat anchor.
No help. FEMA hasn't been helpful.
Wait a minute. That lady that's running for president talks about the $750. Huh. Well, but all that money you give to Ukraine and all these other people that really want to kill us, don't want to do anything to help us, why don't you just give that money to them? That's who you want to give it to begin with.
And a lot of people have been turned down for the $750. Almost everybody I've spoken to hasn't received any of the funding, and they've been turned down for personal items.
Well, they talked about get on your phone or your computer. Do you not see what the devastation is? They don't have a phone or a computer.
There's nothing up here. There's no communication. I'm going to be posting this later. There's no way to access the internet unless you have a Starlink net. And everybody's...
Thank you, Elon Musk, by the way.
Oh, yes. Thank you,
come
Elon
soon,
Musk.
President Donald Trump, we need you.
What are the... Yes.
So that's political, obviously, but it also is reflective of what occurred during a disaster. So going back to my original assertion that a sheriff of every county, you folks are your own first responder in
Amen.
your family, in your area, on your street, in your community, and it goes up from there and to the county level itself, and to eschew that, well, things aren't happening, human trafficking isn't happening, that we're not prepared for a disaster. This can only lead to, let's say, poor things in the future. This is not, in my opinion, what we need or want to see in somebody that's running for sheriff right now. So Dan Wilson, independent candidate for sheriff of Kootenai County. Do we have any other prior, say, unaddressed issues that you'd like to talk about right now?
Well, I think that some of the things that we really have not discussed is Kootenai County is ripe right now with a lot of below board deals that are being made. And I didn't realize how much of this was going on prior to becoming a candidate. And after becoming a candidate, when I realized that I was not wanted by both the establishment Republican Party, which to me needs to be completely cleaned house. Those that are claiming that they're MAGA, that they're America First, that they're extreme conservatives, they don't really believe that. Their actions have stated otherwise. And what they're doing is those people that are elected officials are turning a blind eye to the backroom deals that are taking place. Kootenai County is a very, very special place. I've lived in this region my entire life. I grew up 25 miles to the west before I moved over here. We have, as you will know, BZ, this is a very, very special, unique place in the most conservative state in the country. And once we lose this, it's gone. But we are in jeopardy of losing this because rather than electing truly community first, I'm not even going to say America first. Let's talk about community first individuals like myself that will come in without political alliances that their code and their creed guide them. They can't be bought, can't be sold. You got to have guys like me that will come in and get rid of the corruption that's there. A lot of these Republicans, man, they're okay with it because it's not really about their principles. It's all about being a part of their club, their tribe. And so they'll turn a blind eye to corrupt products like a helicopter program that has so many wrong things with it that it should not exist. They won't sever ties with a sheriff and a county commissioner where the sheriff has given this county commissioner a special deputization and he has access to privileged information. This isn't my own words. This is their words in the Coeur d'Alene Press from November 18th, 2023. But we have to ask ourselves, in light of Prop 1 right now that is being pushed, where we would in essence get open primaries and ranked choice voting, part of that, once that's in place, if they're successful with Prop 1, the next thing that they're going to be doing is they're going to be pushing cannabis. You just watch it. I absolutely believe that they will, with referendum, get cannabis here. And here's my problem. Right now, Bruce Matari and Bob Norris are receiving out-of-state funds, maximum donations from heavy hitters in the cannabis business industry. These are things that my so-called Republican friends do not care about. They have not bothered to investigate the evidence that we've provided to them that's at their fingertips. It doesn't matter because this guy has an R behind him. So there is a lot of corruption that's going on with business deals, land deals, deals that are being made with the tribe. Kootenai County Republicans have become the very thing that they used to stand against. But I am talking with other men in other counties right here in the West, all the way down to Oregon, down into southern Idaho, into Utah. Men that, like myself, are not part of the Republican Party, but we're extremely conservative. And we've left these parties because we realize that there is no way to defeat the problem if you're inside of it. And I'm inspired by men like Mark Scott out of the Dalles, Oregon, that is running as a write-in candidate. And Doug Trauble from southern Idaho that's running against Ada County Sheriff Matt Clifford. Matt Clifford refused to debate Doug in the same way that Bob Norris has refused to debate me. So, folks, when you're right here in this region and even beyond, and you're looking at those best qualified to serve you, don't be conned by believing that the sheriff position has to be a career law enforcement individual. That's simply not true. The founders were very wise when they understood how elected government is supposed to be. And of course, in the state of Idaho, there's only 3 things that are required to be a sheriff: 21, a citizen of the United States, and a citizen of the county, because they understood that it's an elected position. So don't be conned by career cops that will tell you the sheriff's office will dive into chaos if you don't have one of us. And lastly, I would say is that it's important that you have capably and well-equipped men and women that want to serve their community and that will make promises like myself, where I've said, I'll only serve 2 terms. I believe that man inevitably becomes corrupted. Not everyone, but after 2 terms, 8 years, the likelihood that you start to become compromised and lose sight of the mission, at least for me, would be exceptional. And I know my nature, and I would just say 2 terms and then I'm done. I will never run again after that. And then also, where I've said I'm going to cap my salary at $99,000 a year and return the almost $50,000 back to the programs that I'm passionate about, which is my volunteer service division. So I understand as a sheriff what's coming down the road. I'm not sheriff yet, but as a sheriff, you want me because I understand the dangers that are on the horizon and that has been planning for it and that has the ability to lead with the extreme ownership that is so desperately missing right now in northern Idaho. So, BZ, as always, I appreciate you not only coming and let me be part of your program, but to also talk about difficult subjects that many don't want to talk about. And of course, because of your background, I respect you immensely. And it means a lot that a man of your background and credentials believes enough in an independent like me to have me on not once, but 3 times. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Folks, I've said this on 2 prior occasions when I've had Dan Wilson on the show. But here's, in my opinion, why Dan Wilson running as a constitutional sheriff has importance and meaning. and that's why this show is important in your counties, in your states, in your areas as well. Not just locally, but nationally. So think, look, examine, and research those individuals that are running on your ballot this November in 13 days from now for sheriff, for example. Do your own investigations, because these people will very likely have a large and direct impact and immediate impact on your future freedoms and liberties. And you want to keep your freedoms and your liberties. So, Dan, in finality, please tell people where they can donate to your campaign and maybe help out, or maybe even discover some information, some additional information about you.
Great. Thank you very much. The best starting page is theidahosheriff.com, theidahosheriff.com. From there, you can jump all around to find our social media links on X, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. All those are the Idaho Sheriff. You can give securely on theidahosheriff.com. You can see my bio. You can see over 30 hours of weekly town halls that I've hosted live this entire campaign session, where people want to know about me and where I stand. I've run the most substantive, transparent campaign in Kootenai County history. All you have to do, if you really are interested, go to our webpage, type in the search engine, whatever you want to look up, and numerous articles, evidence of the things that I have said that the sheriff and his cronies are up to. We've linked it all up there. So we appreciate everybody's looking at us and support. The support from the community has been overwhelming. We're going to win this race. We're going to be the very first independent sheriff to win this county. We're hearing it every single day. The people that have been affected, that aren't part of the good old boy, the Republican Country Club right here. And lastly, the people are saying, we want hope, we want leadership. And I'm here to offer hope for everybody, no matter what your political ideation is. Remember, we did not descend from fearful men. We descended from men who understood the times, they acted accordingly, and they pledged their lives and their fortunes and their sacred honor. That has been upheld generation after generation, and we're facing very serious circumstances right here now and will be in the not too distant future. So don't lose hope. Stay strong and of good courage. Unite with your community, love one another, and may God bless all of Kootenai County. May God bless you, BZ, and God bless the USA.
Well, thank you very much. Dan, thank you so kindly for your time today. And thank Donna as well. And I would
she
say
says hello.
Oh, okay, thank you. And I'll see you a little bit later this week, perhaps. Again, rumors, allegations of that nature. Thanks to Dan Wilson. Appreciate it. Can you imagine, folks, the precedent that would be set if an independent running for sheriff were to win? I think that would make a rather large statement to other persons running on all sorts of tickets and all sorts of ballots. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, thank you kindly for watching and listening today. The issues facing us are vast and they are wide, but forearmed with knowledge is absolutely the best means of helping to secure our future here in this county with that individual, and also in your county, in your state, in your area, in your neighborhood. The first responder in any emergent situation is you and your family and your street and your neighborhood and your community and the sheriff's department that supports you. A final word. 13 days to the election. Vote in the coming election with insight and with knowledge. But absolutely, positively, get out to vote. Everyone, God bless, take care, and be safe.